When a respected teacher's hands shake as he shows you an anonymous complaint about inappropriate behavior, and there's genuine fear in his eyes, the kind that comes from knowing you could lose everything, you understand someone is playing a very dirty game. Tom Wilson had been teaching math to kids for 28 years, and every single one of his students knew that Mr. Wilson was as honest as a multiplication table. But when he sat across from me in his empty classroom after hours and said, "Riley, someone wants to destroy my life, and I'm afraid I know who," I realized that numbers don't lie, but people sure as hell lie about numbers. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the whiteboards covered in algebraic equations. It was 4:30 on a Tuesday afternoon in late October, and the hallways of Sunny Slope High School echoed with that particular emptiness that comes when all the kids have gone home and only the dedicated teachers remain. Tom had called me 3 days ago, his voice tight with a panic I'd never heard from him before. My daughter, Emma, was in his AP calculus class, and she'd come home raving about how Mr. Wilson made even the most complex problems feel like puzzles you actually wanted to solve. "Dad, he doesn't just teach math," she'd told me over dinner the week before. "He teaches us how to think, how to break down problems and find solutions. He says math is like detective work. You follow the clues until you find the truth." That's the kind of teacher every parent hopes their kid gets lucky enough to have. The kind who doesn't just fill heads with information, but actually shapes how young minds approach the world. I'd known Tom Wilson for about 5 years, ever since Emma started at Sunny Slope. We'd crossed paths at parent-teacher conferences, school fundraisers, and the occasional community event. He struck me as the kind of man my father would have called solid, dependable, principled, the type who'd give you his word and keep it even if it cost him something. My father had been a teacher, too, back in Nebraska where I grew up. High school history, 32 years in the same building. I'd watched him pour his heart into those kids, coming home with stories about their breakthrough moments, their struggles, their victories. And I'd seen what it did to him when budget cuts forced him into early retirement. He never quite recovered from losing that sense of purpose, that connection to something larger than himself. Maybe that's why Tom's call had hit me so hard. "Riley, I need your help," he'd said over the phone, his usually steady voice cracking slightly. "Something's happening to me, and I don't know who else to trust. I can't go to the police, not with this kind of accusation. But you understand how these things work." He was right about that. 20 years as a cop in Phoenix had taught me exactly how allegations against teachers played out. Guilty until proven innocent, careers destroyed by whispers, lives ruined while lawyers sorted through the truth. Even when vindicated, most teachers never fully recovered. The stain was permanent. Now, sitting in his classroom surrounded by 28 years of teaching awards and thank you letters from grateful students, Tom looked like a man who'd seen his world starting to crumble. His usually neat button-down shirt was wrinkled, and there were dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and too much coffee. The walls told the story of a dedicated educator. Framed certificates from the National Education Association, photos of graduating classes stretching back to the Reagan administration, a thank you card from a former student who'd become an engineer. "Mr. Wilson, you taught me that math isn't about finding the right answer. It's about learning to ask the right questions." On his desk sat a small plaque that read, "The best teachers are those who show you where to look but don't tell you what to see." Next to it was a coffee mug with Muck One Teacher in faded letters, obviously handmade by a child. "Tell me what's going on," I said, settling into one of those uncomfortable plastic chairs that somehow every school in America had decided was perfect for learning. Tom pulled out a manila folder with hands that trembled slightly. 3 weeks ago, I got this." Inside was a formal complaint letter on school letterhead. The language was clinical, professional, but the accusations made my blood run cold. A student, unnamed for privacy reasons, had allegedly complained about inappropriate comments and behavior from Mr. Wilson during after-school tutoring sessions. The letter was signed by Gerald Campbell, the school principal, and it used all the right legal language about preliminary investigation and due process. But the underlying message was clear. Tom Wilson was being accused of sexual misconduct with a minor. Tom, this is serious stuff. What exactly are they claiming you did? The letter's vague, but from what I can piece together, someone is saying I made sexual comments to a female student during tutoring sessions, that I touched her inappropriately, that I created a hostile environment for female students. Tom's voice cracked on the last phrase. Riley, I never said anything inappropriate to any student. Never. In 28 years, I've never even had a parent complain about my teaching methods, let alone something like this. He handed me another document. This one was from the parents of Ashley Morrison, a junior in his third-period class, demanding his immediate suspension pending a full investigation. The letter was typed on expensive letterhead from a downtown law firm and used language that suggested they were prepared to take this public if the school didn't act quickly. And yesterday, Tom continued, his voice barely above a whisper, I overheard Gerald Campbell, that's our principal, on the phone with someone saying, "Don't worry, Wilson will be gone by next week. We just need one more incident." I studied Tom's face carefully. In my 20 years as a cop and 5 years as a private investigator, I'd gotten pretty good at reading people. Body language, speech patterns, the little tells that separate truth from deception. Tom Wilson was telling the truth. But someone was working very hard to make it look like he wasn't. "Walk me through your typical day," I said. "Start from when you arrive at school." "I get here around 6:45 every morning. I like to have my lessons prepared and the classroom ready before the first bell. First period starts at 7:30. That's Algebra 2. Then I have geometry, lunch break, AP calculus, trigonometry, and a study hall period. What about after regular hours? Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, I run tutoring sessions for kids who are struggling. It's voluntary, no extra pay, but some of these kids just need a little extra help to succeed." His voice took on the passionate tone I'd heard when he talked about teaching. "Math builds on itself, Riley. If a kid doesn't understand polynomials, they'll never grasp calculus. I'd rather spend my own time helping them now than watch them struggle for the rest of their academic careers." "How many students typically attend these sessions?" "Usually between 5 and 10, mix of boys and girls, different grade levels. I keep the classroom door open, and Mrs. Chen, that's our librarian, often stays late, so there are always other adults in the building." Everything Tom was telling me sounded like the practices of a teacher who was very conscious of maintaining appropriate boundaries. Too conscious, maybe, for someone who was guilty of the things he was being accused of. "Tom, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. Has there ever been anything at all, that could be misinterpreted? Any interaction with a student that someone could twist?" Tom was quiet for a long moment, staring at the equation he'd written on the whiteboard. "Honesty, reliability. There was something about 5 years ago. A student named Jennifer Walsh. Bright kid, really struggling with family problems at home, parents going through a messy divorce, financial troubles. The whole situation was affecting her grades." He paused. "I helped her get into a tutoring program, wrote recommendation letters for college applications, even connected her family with some resources for financial aid. Nothing inappropriate, just a teacher helping a student succeed." "What happened to her?" "She transferred schools suddenly in the middle of her junior year. Her parents said it was for family reasons, but I always wondered if someone had said something about me helping her." if they thought I was getting too involved in her personal life. Tom rubbed his forehead. I've been more careful since then, maybe too careful. Some of my colleagues think I'm paranoid, but I've seen good teachers destroyed by misunderstandings. The mention of Jennifer Walsh sent a chill down my spine. In cases like this, patterns matter. If someone was building a case against Tom, they'd use every piece of ammunition they could find, including recontextualizing past relationships with students. What about Sue? What does your wife think about all this? Something flickered across Tom's face. Pain, disappointment, maybe something deeper. The change was subtle, but I'd learned to watch for those micro-expressions that revealed more than words. Sue's been distant lately. Ever since this started, she seems more concerned about practical matters than my emotional state. She keeps asking about my pension, about what would happen if I lost my job before retirement, says she's just worried about our financial security, but he trailed off. But what? The questions feel calculated, Riley. Like she's already planning for the worst-case scenario instead of believing in my innocence. Tom's shoulders sagged. Last month she started working late a lot. Says it's busy season at the insurance company where she works, but when I called to take her dinner one night, they said she'd left hours earlier. The pieces were starting to form a picture, and I didn't like what I was seeing. A wife asking pointed questions about financial consequences. A principal who seemed confident about the timeline for Tom's removal. Anonymous accusations that conveniently couldn't be verified or challenged. Tom, I think your wife might be having an affair. The words hung in the air between us. Tom closed his eyes and was quiet for nearly a minute. I've wondered, he finally said. The late nights, the emotional distance, the way she looks at me sometimes, like I'm a problem she needs to solve rather than a husband she loves. He opened his eyes and looked directly at me. But even if she is cheating, why would that connect to these accusations against me? I don't know yet. But in my experience, when multiple suspicious things happen at the same time, they're usually connected. Tom stood up and walked to the window overlooking the school parking lot. Most of the cars were gone now, just a few teachers' vehicles scattered across the asphalt. You know what the worst part is, Riley? I love this job. I love these kids. Every September I get a new group of students who think math is boring or impossible, and by June, most of them are solving problems they never thought they could handle. I see kids gain confidence, learn to think critically, develop skills they'll use for the rest of their lives. He turned back to face me. If I lose this, I don't just lose a job. I lose my identity. That's when I knew I was taking the case. I'd taken a lot of cases over the years, cheating spouses, insurance fraud, missing persons, corporate theft. But something about Tom Wilson's situation hit me in a place I usually kept locked away. Maybe it was thinking about my father, forced into retirement when he still had so much to give. Maybe it was watching Emma light up when she talked about her calculus class. Or maybe it was just recognizing a good man being targeted by people who wanted to destroy him for their own purposes. I'll take the case, Tom. But I need you to promise me something. Don't change your routine, don't avoid your students, and whatever you do, don't give them any reason to claim you're acting guilty. What should I tell Sue? Nothing for now. If she's involved in this somehow, we don't want to tip her off that we're investigating. Just act normal, keep doing your job, and let me figure out what's really going on. 3 days later, I was parked across from Southwestern Insurance Associates at 4:30 in the afternoon. According to Tom, Sue had been working late every night this week. The company was housed in a generic office building in Scottsdale, the kind of place that screamed middle management and corporate efficiency. At 4:45, I watched Sue Wilson walk out of the building, moving with the purposeful stride of someone who had somewhere important to be. She was a petite woman in her mid-40s, professionally dressed in a way that suggested she took care with her appearance. Even from across the parking lot, I could see she'd been to a hair salon recently, highlights that probably cost more than Tom spent on clothes in a month. Sue got into her Honda Civic and pulled out of the parking lot. But instead of turning toward home, she headed east on Camelback Road into the more affluent parts of Scottsdale. I followed her through the afternoon traffic, staying far enough back to avoid detection. Sue wasn't just leaving work early, she was driving like someone who didn't want to be followed. She took 3 unnecessary turns and doubled back twice before finally pulling into the parking lot of the Desert Palms Inn, a mid-range hotel off the interstate. The Desert Palms wasn't the kind of place you went for a romantic getaway. It was clean and functional, the type of hotel that catered to business travelers and people who needed a discreet place to meet. Sue parked near the back of the lot, away from the main entrance, and walked quickly across the asphalt with her head down. I watched from my car as she disappeared into the lobby. 20 minutes later, a familiar figure emerged from a silver Lexus that looked like it had just been detailed. Gerald Campbell, Tom's principal, looked around nervously before heading into the same hotel. Campbell was a tall man in his early 50s with prematurely gray hair and the kind of expensive suit that suggested his salary was higher than most teachers. He moved with the confident swagger of someone accustomed to being in charge, but the nervous glances over his shoulder suggested he knew he was doing something he shouldn't be. The affair was confirmed, but affairs don't usually involve detailed planning to destroy someone's career. I needed to get closer to understand what they were really planning. Over the next week, I established a pattern. Sue and Campbell met at the Desert Palms Inn every Tuesday and Friday afternoon. They were careful, different entrances, staggered arrivals, paying cash at the front desk, but not careful enough. On Friday, I managed to get the room next to theirs using a fake ID and a story about being a traveling salesman. The walls weren't thick, and I'd brought along a directional microphone I'd picked up during my police days, a little device that could pick up conversations through drywall if you knew how to use it. What I heard made my stomach turn. "The Ashley Morrison complaint goes to the school board on Monday," Campbell's voice came through clearly. "Her parents are pushing for immediate suspension." "What about the other girl?" Sue's voice, but harder than I'd ever heard it when she spoke to Tom. "Jessica Park's parents will file their complaint Tuesday. I've been working on them for weeks, convinced them that Wilson made inappropriate comments about Jessica's appearance during class. My blood ran cold. They weren't just manufacturing one false accusation, they were orchestrating multiple complaints to create a pattern of alleged misconduct. "And if Tom tries to defend himself?" Campbell laughed, a sound without any warmth. "I've got security cameras in every classroom, Sue. It's amazing how a little creative editing can make an innocent conversation look predatory. A compliment about a student's improvement becomes a comment about her appearance. Encouragement becomes grooming behavior." I nearly dropped the microphone. They weren't just planning to frame Tom, they were planning to manufacture evidence using the school's own security system. "When this is over," Sue continued, "how long before we can be together openly?" 6 months, maybe less. Once Wilson's gone and the scandal dies down, I'll take that superintendent position in Tucson. The district's already approached me about it. Apparently, my decisive handling of the Wilson situation has impressed them. Campbell's voice dripped with smug satisfaction. "We'll have my pension, plus whatever you get from the divorce settlement." "What if he doesn't agree to the divorce?" "A man facing child molestation charges? He'll be lucky if he's not in prison, Sue. You'll get everything, the house, his pension, his life insurance, everything he's worked 28 years to build." The casual cruelty in their voices was breathtaking. They were discussing the complete destruction of a good man's life with the same tone most people use to plan a weekend getaway. "I almost feel bad about this, Gerald," Sue said after a moment of silence. Tom's not a bad man. He's just boring. 15 years of coming home to someone who cares more about trigonometry than romance. Do you know he's never taken me anywhere more exciting than Applebee's? Never surprised me with anything more expensive than a greeting card from the drugstore? Her voice took on a bitter edge. I watch my friends married to lawyers and doctors, posting photos from Europe and Hawaii, wearing jewelry that costs more than my car. And what do I have? A husband who gets excited about graphing calculators and thinks a big splurge is buying name-brand cereal. Save the guilt for someone who cares, Campbell replied. Wilson's an obstacle to both our futures. Obstacles get removed. Besides, it's not like we're really hurting him. He'll find another job eventually, maybe tutoring or something. He'll be fine. What about his pension? 28 years of contributions forfeited when he's terminated for cause. That's district policy. The money goes back into the general fund. Campbell's voice turned cold, which means bigger budgets for administrators who know how to play the game. I'd heard enough, but as I was packing up my equipment, Sue said something that stopped me cold. Gerald, what about the other teachers? The ones who've been asking questions about Tom's situation? What about them? Margaret Chen, the librarian, was asking me yesterday about the specifics of the complaints. And Bill Rodriguez in the science department made some comment about how the timing seemed suspicious. Campbell was quiet for a moment. We'll deal with them if they become a problem. There are ways to make troublesome teachers uncomfortable. Budget cuts, schedule changes, performance reviews. Most of them will get the message. The scope of what I was hearing was larger than just a plot against Tom Wilson. Campbell was running the school like his personal fiefdom, and anyone who threatened his control was a potential target. Besides, Campbell continued, once we're in Tucson, none of this will matter. I'll be a superintendent, you'll be my wife, and Tom Wilson will be a footnote in someone else's personnel file. After they left, I sat in the hotel room for another hour, processing what I'd learned. This wasn't just adultery. It was a calculated conspiracy to destroy an innocent man's life for financial gain. Campbell was using his position of authority to manufacture evidence, and Sue was betraying 15 years of marriage for a chance at what she saw as a better life. But I'd also learned something that might be useful. Campbell had mentioned Margaret Chen, the librarian, asking questions. If she was suspicious about Tom's situation, she might be an ally. The next morning, I decided to pay a visit to Sunny Slope High School. I called ahead and made an appointment to discuss my daughter's academic progress with one of her teachers, a legitimate enough reason to be on campus. The school was a typical Arizona public high school, built in the 1980s with that institutional architecture that prioritized function over form. Concrete block walls, narrow hallways, and that particular smell of industrial cleaning products and teenage anxiety that exists in every high school in America. I found Margaret Chen in the library during her lunch break. She was a woman in her late 50s, with graying hair pulled back in a practical bun and the kind of wire-rimmed glasses that suggested she spent a lot of time reading. The library was her domain. Well-organized, quiet, with motivational posters about the importance of learning scattered around the walls. Mr. Hunt, I'm Margaret Chen. You wanted to discuss Emma's research project? I'd done my homework on Margaret Chen. She'd been at Sunny Slope for 15 years, had a master's degree in library science, and was known for being fiercely protective of both her books and her students. She also had a reputation for being observant, the kind of person who noticed when things didn't add up. Actually, Ms. Chen, I was hoping to talk to you about something else. I understand you've been asking questions about the situation with Tom Wilson. Her expression immediately became guarded. I'm not sure what you mean. I'm a private investigator. Tom Wilson hired me to look into the allegations against him. I have reason to believe he's being framed. Margaret looked around the library to make sure no students were within earshot, then gestured for me to follow her into a small office behind the circulation desk. "Close the door," she said. Once we were alone, her demeanor changed completely. "I've been hoping someone would look into this situation. Tom Wilson is one of the most ethical teachers I've ever worked with. These accusations don't make sense. What have you observed?" "For starters, the timing is suspicious. Tom's been here 28 years without a single complaint, and suddenly there are multiple allegations in the span of a few weeks?" Margaret shook her head. "Then there's Gerald Campbell's behavior. He's been practically gleeful about the whole situation, talking about how decisive action will enhance his reputation with the district office. Has Campbell said anything specific about the case?" "Not directly, but I've noticed things. Phone calls where he lowers his voice when people walk by. Meetings with parents that aren't on his official calendar. And yesterday, I saw him coming out of the IT office with Jennifer Walsh's student file." "Jennifer Walsh? The student who transferred 5 years ago?" "No, that's a different Jennifer. This is Jennifer Walsh Morrison, Ashley Morrison's younger sister. She's a sophomore, quiet kid, usually does well in school. But lately she seemed anxious, distracted." The mention of the Morrison family name made pieces click into place. Campbell wasn't just creating false allegations, he was using family connections to make the accusations seem more credible. "Ms. Chen, I need to ask you something in confidence. Have you noticed anything unusual about Sue Wilson's behavior lately?" Margaret's expression darkened. "Sue Wilson has been coming to the school more frequently over the past few months. She claims it's to discuss volunteering opportunities, but she always seems more interested in asking questions about school policies and procedures, particularly policies regarding teacher misconduct investigations." "Has she asked about anything specific?" 2 weeks ago, she wanted to know about our security camera system, asked whether the cameras recorded audio as well as video, how long the recordings were kept, who had access to them. Margaret leaned forward. "Mr. Hunt, I've been a librarian for 30 years. I know when someone is researching something for the wrong reasons." This was the confirmation I needed. Sue wasn't just having an affair. She was actively participating in gathering intelligence for the frame-up. "Ms. Chen, would you be willing to help me prove Tom's innocence?" She didn't hesitate. "What do you need me to do?" "Keep your eyes and ears open. Document anything unusual you observe. And if you hear Campbell or anyone else discussing Tom's case, make note of it." "There's something else you should know," Margaret said. "I've been doing some research of my own into Gerald Campbell's background. Did you know he was forced to resign from his previous position in California? This was news to me." "What happened?" "It's not in his official personnel file, but I have contacts in the education community. Campbell was an assistant principal in San Diego when several teachers at his school filed complaints about his management style. There were allegations of favoritism, inappropriate relationships with staff members, and financial irregularities." "Was he charged with anything?" "No, but he left very quietly in the middle of the school year. The district paid out settlements to 3 different teachers." Margaret pulled out a manila folder. "I've been documenting everything I can find about his time here at Sunny Slope. The pattern is clear. He targets teachers who threaten his authority or refuse to play along with his schemes." I looked through Margaret's files. She'd compiled an impressive dossier on Campbell's methods. Teachers who'd been forced to transfer to other schools after questioning his decisions. Budget allocations that didn't add up. Parent complaints that were mysteriously resolved without documentation. "He's been building his own little empire," Margaret continued, "and Tom Wilson represents everything Campbell despises: integrity, dedication, genuine care for students. Tom would never go along with the kind of corner-cutting and favoritism that Campbell thrives on." As I was getting ready to leave, Margaret pulled me aside. "Mr. Hunt, there's one more thing. I think Campbell has someone feeding him information about the investigation into Tom. Someone close to the situation. What makes you say that? Yesterday afternoon, I overheard Campbell on a phone call. He was talking about our inside source and how they were keeping tabs on Wilson's activities. The timing suggests he knew about Tom hiring you before it should have been common knowledge. The implications hit me like a punch to the gut. If Campbell had an inside source, the most likely candidates were either someone in Tom's family or someone Tom had confided in about hiring me. And since Tom had specifically mentioned discussing the situation with Sue, I drove back to my office with a sick feeling in my stomach. Not only was Sue Wilson betraying her husband with another man, but she was also serving as a spy, feeding information about Tom's defense efforts directly to his accusers. That evening, I met with Tom at a coffee shop near his house. He looked worse than when I'd seen him the previous week. The stress was clearly taking its toll. His usual neat appearance was slightly disheveled, and he had the hollow-eyed look of someone who wasn't sleeping well. "Any progress?" he asked, stirring his coffee absently. I'd spent the afternoon deciding how much to tell him. On one hand, he had a right to know what his wife was doing. On the other hand, if Sue was reporting back to Campbell, I couldn't risk Tom confronting her and blowing my investigation. "I'm making progress, but I need you to trust me and not ask too many questions yet. What I can tell you is that your instincts were right. This is a conspiracy, and it goes deeper than just false accusations." "How deep?" "Deep enough that you need to be very careful about who you trust. Don't discuss our investigation with anyone. Not colleagues, not friends, and especially not Sue." Tom's face went pale. "You think Sue is involved?" "I think Sue isn't the woman you married, Tom, and I think she's made choices that put her interests ahead of yours." We sat in silence for several minutes. Finally, Tom spoke. 15 years ago, when Sue and I got married, I thought I was the luckiest man alive. She was beautiful, funny, supportive of my career. She said she loved that I was passionate about teaching, that I cared more about making a difference than making money. He stared out the window at the parking lot. Maybe that was true then, or maybe I just heard what I wanted to hear. What changed? I don't know. Gradually, she started making comments about our lifestyle, our house, our car. She'd point out what other couples had. Bigger homes, nicer vacations, more expensive things. I thought it was just normal dissatisfaction, the kind of thing all married couples deal with. Tom took a sip of his coffee. "Last year, she suggested I look into administrative positions, said I'd been a teacher long enough that it was time to move up to principal or assistant principal roles. When I told her I loved teaching and didn't want to give it up for an office job, she got angry." "What did she say?" "That I was being selfish, that I was putting my own desires ahead of our family's financial security. She said she was tired of being embarrassed when people asked what her husband did for a living." Tom's voice cracked slightly. "She made it sound like teaching was something to be ashamed of." The picture was becoming clearer. Sue Wilson had married a teacher when she thought he would eventually become something more lucrative. When that didn't happen, she'd found someone who could give her the lifestyle she wanted. "Tom, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Have you told Sue anything about hiring me?" "I mentioned that I was getting some advice about the legal aspects of the situation." "Why? What exactly did you tell her?" "Just that I'd spoken to someone about my options, about how these kinds of investigations work." Tom frowned. She seemed supportive, said it was smart to be proactive, but she asked a lot of questions about who I was working with, what kind of advice I was getting. Campbell's inside source. Sue was pumping Tom for information and passing it along to her lover. "Tom, from now on, don't tell Sue anything about our investigation. If she asks, just say you're handling it through the school's official channels." "You really think she's—" "I think your wife has made her choice, and it wasn't you." The next morning brought crisis. Tom called me at 6 a.m., his voice barely controlled panic. "Riley, Campbell just called an emergency meeting with the school board for this afternoon. He says new evidence has come forward that requires my immediate suspension." I felt my chest tighten. Campbell was moving faster than I'd expected. "What kind of evidence?" "He wouldn't say, but Riley, Jennifer Morrison's parents filed an official complaint yesterday. They're claiming I made sexual comments to their daughter during tutoring sessions." "Tom, listen to me carefully. Do not go to that meeting alone. I'm calling a lawyer friend of mine, and we're going to be there." "It's too late, Riley. Even if we prove I'm innocent, the rumor mill will destroy me. In communities like this, accusations stick. I'll never be able to teach again." "Don't give up yet. We have evidence too." But even as I said it, I knew Tom was right about the practical realities. In the court of public opinion, teachers accused of sexual misconduct were guilty until proven innocent, and sometimes even after they were proven innocent. I spent the morning preparing for the school board meeting and trying to figure out Campbell's endgame. He was rushing the timeline, which suggested either that he was under pressure to act quickly or that he'd learned about my investigation. At 2 p.m., I sat in the Sunny Slope High School conference room watching Gerald Campbell orchestrate Tom's destruction with surgical precision. The school board members, 5 elected community volunteers, looked uncomfortable with the proceedings, but Campbell had clearly briefed them on the severity of the situation. Campbell had prepared a presentation that was a masterpiece of manipulation. He showed edited security footage that made Tom's interactions with female students look suspicious. He read statements from concerned parents about Mr. Wilson's unusual interest in certain students. He presented a timeline of alleged incidents that painted a picture of escalating inappropriate behavior. But what really struck me was how Campbell played the part of the reluctant administrator, forced to take difficult action to protect the children. "This is one of the most difficult decisions I've had to make in my career," Campbell said, his voice heavy with false regret. "Tom Wilson has been a valued member of our faculty for 28 years. His contributions to this school and these students cannot be overstated. But the safety and well-being of our students must come first." Tom sat beside his hastily hired lawyer, looking like a man watching his life's work being systematically destroyed. Sue sat in the back of the room, playing the role of the supportive but concerned wife perfectly. To anyone who didn't know better, she looked like a woman torn between loyalty to her husband and concern for his alleged victims. Campbell continued his presentation with charts showing the pattern of complaints, testimonials from parents expressing their concerns, and recommendations from the district's legal department about appropriate action in situations of this nature. "While I want to emphasize that Mr. Wilson is entitled to due process and the presumption of innocence," Campbell said, "the nature of these allegations requires us to err on the side of caution. The potential harm to students, if these allegations prove true, far outweighs the inconvenience to Mr. Wilson if they prove false." It was a masterful performance, designed to make Tom's suspension seem like the only reasonable course of action. That's when I noticed Margaret Chen in the back of the room, taking detailed notes throughout Campbell's presentation. She caught my eye and gave an almost imperceptible nod. When Campbell finished his presentation and called for a vote on Tom's suspension, I stood up. "Before you vote, I think the board should hear some additional evidence." Campbell's face showed the first crack in his composure. "Mr. Hunt, this is a closed proceeding. You have no standing here." "Actually, I do." I pulled out my private investigator's license. "I've been investigating threats against Mr. Wilson for the past 2 weeks, and I've uncovered evidence of a conspiracy to frame him." The room exploded in confused murmurs. Campbell tried to regain control, but I was already setting up my audio equipment. "What you're about to hear is a recording made accidentally by Mr. Wilson while he was preparing lessons for his students. It captures a phone conversation discussing plans to manufacture evidence against him. I played the recording of Sue's voice. "The camera in his classroom will catch everything tomorrow. By Monday, Tom Wilson will be finished." The room went dead silent. Sue's face had gone white, and Campbell looked like he was trying to calculate his options. "That recording could be fake," Campbell said quickly. "It proves nothing without proper authentication." "You're right," I said, "which is why I also have this." I played portions of the recording I'd made at the hotel, where Campbell and Sue discussed their plan in detail. Campbell's own voice filled the room. "It's amazing how a little creative editing can make an innocent conversation look predatory." Several board members were staring at Campbell in shock, but he wasn't finished. "These recordings were obtained illegally," he said. "They can't be used as evidence of anything. Mr. Hunt is clearly a partisan investigator hired by the accused to disrupt these proceedings." That's when Margaret Chen stood up. "Actually, Principal Campbell, I have some evidence that was obtained completely legally." She walked to the front of the room carrying a thick manila folder and a laptop computer. "For the past 6 months, I've been documenting Principal Campbell's activities as part of an ongoing investigation by the State Education Department. We've been looking into allegations of corruption and abuse of power at this school." Campbell's face went from pale to gray. "In my capacity as a volunteer investigator for the state, I've recorded dozens of conversations where Principal Campbell discussed taking bribes from parents for grade changes, manipulating disciplinary records, and targeting teachers who refused to participate in his schemes." Margaret opened her laptop and connected it to the room's projection system. "I have audio recordings, email printouts, financial documents, and witness statements documenting a pattern of corruption that goes back 3 years. The screen filled with a spreadsheet showing payments from parents to Campbell, grade changes that correlated with those payments, and a list of teachers who had been forced out after questioning Campbell's practices. "Mr. Wilson wasn't your first target, Principal Campbell. But thanks to Mr. Hunt's investigation, he'll be your last." Campbell tried one more desperate play. "This is a coordinated attack by disgruntled employees. Margaret Chen has been trying to undermine my authority for months." "Actually," said a new voice from the back of the room, "Ms. Chen has been working with us." Everyone turned to see 2 men in dark suits entering the conference room. The taller one showed his badge. "Agent David Kim, FBI. Agent Sarah Martinez, Arizona State Bureau of Investigation. We've been conducting a joint investigation into corruption in the Sunny Slope School District." The next hour was a blur of accusations, denials, and revelations. It turned out that Margaret had been working with state and federal investigators for months, building a case against Campbell's systematic corruption. The investigation had originally focused on financial irregularities, but had expanded when they learned about Campbell's pattern of targeting honest teachers. Campbell's scheme with Tom had provided the final evidence they needed. Not only had he been manufacturing false accusations, but he'd been using his position to extort sexual favors from Sue Wilson in exchange for her husband's job security. "Mrs. Wilson," Agent Martinez said, "you need to understand that you're a victim here as well as a participant. Principal Campbell has been manipulating you, using your marriage problems to turn you against your husband." Sue finally broke down, sobbing as she admitted that Campbell had approached her months ago, claiming that Tom was under investigation for inappropriate behavior. Campbell had convinced her that cooperation was the only way to protect herself, and that leaving Tom was her only option for financial security. "He said Tom would lose his pension anyway," Sue cried. "He said I could either go down with him or start building a new life. I was scared, and he was so convincing." Campbell was arrested that evening on charges of extortion, bribery, conspiracy, and abuse of his official position. The FBI found evidence linking him to similar schemes at his previous schools in California and Nevada. He'd been running the same playbook for years: identify vulnerable teachers, manufacture scandals, eliminate opposition, and consolidate power. Sue was charged as a conspirator, but offered a plea deal in exchange for her testimony. The prosecutor recognized that she'd been manipulated by someone in a position of authority, though her actions had still caused significant harm. The school board not only exonerated Tom completely, but offered him Campbell's position as interim principal while they searched for a permanent replacement. They also authorized a formal apology and a financial settlement to compensate him for the emotional distress and damage to his reputation. But for me, the most satisfying moment came 3 days later, when I walked into Tom's classroom and found him back at his whiteboard, working through calculus problems with a group of students who had stayed after school for extra help. "Mr. Wilson," one of the students was saying, "I still don't understand how you know which formula to use." Tom smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him in weeks. "Mathematics is like detective work, Sarah. You look at the clues the problem gives you, and you figure out which tools will help you find the solution. Sometimes you have to try different approaches, but if you stay honest with the process, the truth always emerges." He looked up and saw me standing in the doorway. "Mr. Hunt, come in. We're just working through some challenging derivatives." "Actually, I wanted to talk to you about something else," I said. "Margaret Chen asked me to invite you to dinner this weekend. Apparently, she makes an excellent lasagna." Tom's face colored slightly. "Margaret's been incredibly kind through all of this. I don't know how to thank her for what she did. I think she'd prefer you thank her in person." 6 months later, I attended Tom and Margaret's wedding in the Sunny Slope High School auditorium. It turned out that Margaret had been quietly admiring Tom's integrity and dedication for years, but had never said anything while he was married. Their partnership in bringing down Campbell had blossomed into something deeper. The ceremony was simple but beautiful, with rows of former students serving as witnesses to their union. Emma was one of Margaret's bridesmaids, and she told me afterward that she'd never seen two people so perfectly matched. During his wedding speech, Tom looked out at the audience of former students, fellow teachers, and parents, and said something I'll never forget. "Margaret taught me that when you find someone who values truth as much as you do, every equation in life becomes solvable. We may be starting this marriage later in life than some couples, but that just means we know exactly what we're looking for: honesty, partnership, and the courage to stand up for what's right." As for Sue, the divorce was finalized quietly. She moved into a small apartment across town and took a job as a bookkeeper for a local accounting firm. During the settlement hearing, she looked at Tom and said something that still haunts me. "I thought I wanted excitement and wealth and status, but I threw away the one thing money can't buy: a good man's love and respect." Campbell was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. The FBI investigation revealed that his corruption schemes had stolen more than $2 million from school districts across 3 states. Dozens of teachers had their careers and reputations damaged by his manipulations. The last time I saw Tom, he was in his new office, the principal's office, working on policies to protect teachers from false accusations and ensure that investigations were conducted fairly and transparently. On his desk, next to photos of his wedding day, he'd placed the same small plaque from his classroom. "The best teachers are those who show you where to look, but don't tell you what to see." On his whiteboard, he'd written the same equation he'd always used: honesty, reliability. But underneath it, in Margaret's handwriting, was a new equation: truth plus love, everything. My daughter Emma graduated that spring as valedictorian, and in her speech, she thanked Mr. Wilson for teaching her that the most important equation in life wasn't mathematical. It was the understanding that when you're honest with people, they'll be honest with you. Standing in that auditorium, watching a good man who'd been nearly destroyed by betrayal, now surrounded by people who loved and respected him, I realized something important: The best revenge isn't getting even, it's living well. And sometimes, when the numbers finally add up correctly, even the most complex problems have surprisingly simple solutions. Tom Wilson had spent 28 years teaching kids that math was reliable because it was honest. In the end, it was honesty that saved him, love that completed him, and truth that set them all free. As I walked out of the graduation ceremony, I thought about a conversation I'd had with my father shortly before he died. He'd told me that teaching wasn't really about imparting knowledge. It was about showing young people that they were capable of more than they imagined. The best teachers, he'd said, are the ones who believe in their students even when the students don't believe in themselves. Tom Wilson was that kind of teacher. And in the end, no amount of corruption or betrayal could change that fundamental truth. The case file is closed now, filed away in my office cabinet next to dozens of other investigations. But sometimes, when I drive past Sunny Slope High School, I think about Tom and Margaret working together to create an environment where truth matters more than politics, where good teachers are protected instead of persecuted, and where love really can conquer the worst that human nature has to offer. In a world that often seems determined to tear down good people for the benefit of bad ones, Tom Wilson's story stands as proof that justice isn't just a mathematical equation. It's a choice we make every day to stand up for what's right, no matter the cost. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, that choice leads us not just to justice, but to love.